My name is Madison, 36 years old, and I need to tell you about the night my husband saved my life with just 7 words. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when Robert looked across our dinner table and said something that changed everything. Transfer everything to your account just to be safe. Those words seemed paranoid then, but 48 hours later, he was dead. And when our son Benjamin showed up at my door with his wife and a lawyer demanding his inheritance, I finally understood why Robert had been so insistent. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and please subscribe if you want to hear how a mother's intuition saved her from her own son's betrayal. I should probably start by telling you about the life we built before everything fell apart. Robert and I met during our sophomore year at Boston University. He was studying computer science while I was majoring in marketing. We fell in love over late-night study sessions and cheap coffee from the campus cafe. After graduation, we got married in a small ceremony with just our families present. Robert had big dreams about technology and entrepreneurship, and I believed in every single one of them. For the first few years, we struggled like most young couples do. Robert worked 18-hour days trying to get his first startup off the ground, while I took a job at an advertising agency to pay our bills. We lived in a tiny apartment in Cambridge eating ramen noodles and dreaming about the future. When I got pregnant with Benjamin, Robert promised me that by the time our son could walk, we would have a real home with a backyard. He kept that promise and so much more. Robert's first company developed software for medical billing systems. It wasn't glamorous, but hospitals needed it desperately. He sold that company for $2 million when Benjamin was 3 years old. We bought a house in Wellesley, a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms, and that backyard Robert had promised. I thought we had made it, but Robert was just getting started. His second company focused on cybersecurity for financial institutions. That one sold for $8 million when Benjamin was in middle school. By the time Benjamin graduated from high school, Robert had built and sold his third company, this one specializing in artificial intelligence for supply chain management. The sale price was $15 million. Combined with our investments and the growth of our portfolio over 20 years, we had accumulated $25 million. It sounds like a dream come true, doesn't it? But money has a way of revealing who people really are, and sometimes you discover things about your own family that you wish had stayed hidden. Benjamin grew up with every advantage we could provide. Private schools, tutors, summer camps in Europe, a car for his 16th birthday. We tried not to spoil him, insisted he work summer jobs and volunteer at the local food bank. But looking back, maybe we failed somewhere along the way. He was accepted to Harvard following in his father's footsteps as a computer science major. We were so proud at his graduation watching him walk across that stage. That was 5 years ago, and it was probably the last time I felt genuinely happy about my son's choices. He met Jennifer during his senior year at Harvard. She came from old money her family owned half of Beacon Hill, and she was finishing Harvard Law. When Benjamin introduced us to her, Robert pulled me aside later that night and said something felt off about her. I dismissed his concerns as typical father protectiveness, but Robert had built 3 successful companies by reading people accurately. I should have listened to him then. They got married 2 years after graduation in a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. Jennifer insisted on the Plaza Hotel in New York, 200 guests' flowers flown in from Holland. Benjamin seemed happy, or at least I told myself he was. But after the wedding, something changed. He started coming around less, and when he did visit, it was always with his hand out. First, it was $50,000 for a startup idea he and Jennifer had. Robert gave it to him, wanting to support his son's entrepreneurial spirit. The startup failed in 6 months. Then it was $100,000 for an investment opportunity that couldn't miss. That one vanished even faster. Each time Benjamin came back asking for more, and each time Robert grew more concerned. He started asking to see business plans, financial projections, proof of where the money was going. Benjamin got defensive, accused his father of not trusting him, of being controlling. The arguments became more frequent and more bitter. Jennifer would sit there during these discussions with this little smile on her face, like she was enjoying watching father and son tear into each other. She would occasionally interject with comments about how successful businessmen should support their families, how Robert's wealth was really family wealth. The tension in our family gatherings became unbearable. About a month before that fateful dinner, Robert started acting differently. He would spend hours in his study with the door locked, something he had never done before. I would find him on phone calls that he would quickly end when I entered the room. He started meeting with his personal lawyer, Thomas Brennan, multiple times a week. When I asked what was going on, he would just say he was updating some documents, getting things in order. Nothing to worry about. But I did worry. Robert had always been transparent with me about everything. We made decisions together, discussed every major move in our lives as partners. This secretiveness was completely out of character. He also started organizing all our financial documents, creating detailed spreadsheets of every account, every investment, every property we owned. He put them all in a folder labeled with my name and made sure I knew where it was. The week before the dinner, Robert came home from one of his meetings with Thomas looking particularly troubled. He sat in his study for hours just staring out the window. When I brought him dinner, he pulled me close and held me for a long time. He told me he loved me, that everything he had ever done was for me and Benjamin. The way he said it sounded like a goodbye, but I pushed that thought away. Robert was only 58 in perfect health as far as we knew. We had decades ahead of us. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Robert suggested we go to Lucia's, this small Italian restaurant in the North End where we had our first date all those years ago. It wasn't our anniversary or anyone's birthday, but Robert insisted. He said he wanted a quiet dinner, just the two of us. I remember thinking how handsome he still looked in his navy suit, his hair now silver at the temples, but his eyes still that warm brown that made me fall in love with him. The restaurant was dimly lit with candles on each table, and the smell of garlic and fresh bread filled the air. We ordered our usual dishes, the osso buco for him, and the seafood risotto for me. We shared a bottle of Chianti, and talked about normal things at first. Benjamin's latest request for money, which Robert had denied the previous week. The vacation we were planning to take to Greece in the spring. The charity gala we were supposed to attend that weekend. Then somewhere between the main course and dessert, Robert's entire demeanor shifted. He reached across the table and took both of my hands in his. His palms were sweaty, which was unusual for him. Robert was never nervous about anything. He had pitched to venture capitalists, negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs, testified before Congress about technology regulations. But that night, he was definitely nervous. "Madison," he said, "I need you to do something for me tomorrow, and I need you to not ask too many questions." Of course, I immediately had questions. What was he talking about? Why couldn't he answer questions? He squeezed my hands tighter and continued. "I need you to go to the bank first thing in the morning and transfer everything into accounts that only have your name on them. Everything. Every penny." I pulled my hands back in shock. "What are you talking about? That's our money, our life savings. Why would I need to put it all in my name?" Robert looked around the restaurant as if checking to see if anyone was listening, then leaned forward. He said he had been getting strange calls that some of Benjamin's associates had been making threats. He said he needed to know the money was safe, that I was protected no matter what happened. This seemed extreme paranoid even. "Robert, you're scaring me," I told him. "If someone is threatening you, we should go to the police." He shook his head firmly. "The police couldn't help with this," he said. "This was about protecting our future. Protecting me specifically." He had already prepared all the paperwork, had Thomas draw up the transfer documents. All I had to do was go to the bank and sign them. I argued with him for another 20 minutes. This felt wrong, felt like he was planning to leave me, or that something terrible was about to happen. Robert assured me he wasn't going anywhere, that this was just a precaution. He reminded me that in 35 years of marriage, he had never asked me to do something without explanation. He had never asked me to trust him blindly. But he was asking now. The drive home was silent except for the sound of the rain that had started falling. I kept glancing at Robert as he drove, trying to read his face in the passing streetlights. When we got home, he went straight to his study and brought out a manila folder. Inside were account numbers, passwords, authorization codes, everything I would need for the transfers. He had thought of everything, prepared for every detail. That night in bed, Robert held me differently. Not like a husband holds his wife, but like someone trying to memorize the feeling of another person. He whispered that he loved me over and over, told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I fell asleep with a knot in my stomach, knowing something was terribly wrong but not knowing what. The next morning, Wednesday, Robert was up before dawn. He had coffee ready for me and had already called the bank to let them know I would be coming. He kissed me goodbye at the door, a long, lingering kiss that felt too much like a farewell. "Promise me you'll do this," he said. "Promise me you'll do it right away." I promised, even though every instinct told me something was wrong. The bank manager, someone we had worked with for 15 years, seemed surprised but processed the transfers without question. $25 million moved from joint accounts to accounts in my name only. It took 3 hours to complete all the paperwork, sign all the documents, verify all the transfers. By noon it was done. Every penny we had accumulated over our lifetime together was now legally mine alone. When I got home, Robert was in his study on a conference call. He saw me in the doorway and smiled a genuine smile of relief. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. I nodded and went to make lunch, trying to shake the feeling that I had just participated in something I didn't understand. Looking back now, I realized that feeling was my intuition trying to warn me that our life as we knew it was about to end. Wednesday afternoon passed normally enough. Robert worked from home, taking calls and answering emails. He seemed more relaxed after I confirmed the transfers were complete, even joking around during dinner. We watched our favorite show together on the couch, and for a few hours, I could almost forget about the strange request and the money sitting in accounts with only my name. Almost. Thursday morning, Robert said he wasn't feeling well. This was unusual because Robert never got sick, never complained about his health. He was the type who would work through a flu, who went to the gym even with a pulled muscle. But that morning he looked pale and said his chest felt tight. I wanted to call our doctor, but he said he just needed to rest, that it was probably stress from everything with Benjamin. Instead of resting, though, Robert spent the day organizing. He went through his study methodically, labeling folders, organizing documents, making lists. He showed me where he kept the password to his computer, the combination to the safe, the contact information for all our financial advisors and lawyers. He made me write it all down, watched as I put the information in my own notebook. It felt like he was preparing me for something, training me to handle things alone. Around 3 in the afternoon, Robert called me into his study. He had printed out dozens of documents and arranged them on his desk. "These are all the company documents," he explained, showing me contracts and agreements I had never seen before. "These are the investment accounts, the property deeds, the insurance policies." He went through everything methodically, making sure I understood what each document meant, what each account contained, who to contact if I ever needed help. At 4:30, I was in the kitchen starting dinner when I heard a crash from the study. I ran in to find Robert on the floor, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. I screamed his name, dropped to my knees beside him, tried to help him sit up. He could barely speak, just kept gasping for air. I called 911. My hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. The paramedics arrived in what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. They worked on Robert right there on the study floor, shouting medical terms I didn't understand, pushing medications into IVs. They loaded him onto a stretcher, and I rode in the ambulance, holding his hand while they continued working on him. His eyes found mine, and even through the oxygen mask I could see him trying to tell me something. At the hospital, they rushed Robert straight into the cardiac unit. The doctor, a young woman who looked barely older than Benjamin, explained that Robert was having a massive myocardial infarction, a heart attack, but not a normal one. This was what they called a widowmaker, affecting the main artery that supplied blood to the heart. They were doing everything they could, she said, but I should prepare myself. I sat in that waiting room for 5 hours. 5 hours of pacing, of praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years, of calling Benjamin and getting his voicemail over and over. When he finally called back, his response chilled me. "Is he going to make it?" he asked, and when I said I didn't know, he simply said, "Call me when you know something definitive." When's the funeral? I'll need to check my schedule. No concern, no rush to get to the hospital. Just cold calculation. The doctor came out at 9:43. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock, willing time to slow down, willing this not to be happening. Mrs. Harrison, she said, and I knew from her face what she was about to say. They had done everything possible, but the damage to Robert's heart was too extensive. He was conscious barely and asking for me. Robert looked so small in that hospital bed connected to dozens of machines, each one beeping its own rhythm. His skin was gray. His breathing labored despite the oxygen. When he saw me, he tried to smile. I took his hand, leaned close to hear his whispered words. "You're safe now," he said. "Remember that. Whatever happens, you're safe. The money is yours. Don't let them take it." I told him to stop talking to save his strength, but he squeezed my hand with surprising force. "Listen to me, Madison. I found out things about Benjamin, about what he and Jennifer have been planning. The folder in my study, the one marked with today's date. Read it, all of it. And whatever you do, don't trust them. Don't trust our son." I tried to ask what he meant, but the machines started alarming. Nurses rushed in and they pushed me back. Robert died at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night. The official cause was acute myocardial infarction, a massive heart attack that destroyed most of his heart muscle. The doctor said it was unusual for someone his age with no history of heart disease. But these things happened. Sometimes hearts just gave out. I stood in that hospital corridor after they pronounced him dead, feeling like my own heart had stopped too. I called Benjamin again. "Dad's gone," I said, barely able to get the words out. There was silence on the other end. Then, "What about the will? Has anyone looked at the will yet?" Not a word of sympathy, not a question about how I was doing, just immediate concern about inheritance. I hung up on him and didn't answer when he called back 15 times in the next hour. The next few days passed in a blur. Robert had left specific instructions for his funeral arrangements in that folder he had showed me. He wanted cremation, no viewing, just a small memorial service. He had even written his own obituary highlighting his business achievements, but focusing mainly on his love for his family. Reading it made me cry for the first time since he died, seeing how he described our marriage as his greatest success. Benjamin and Jennifer arrived the day before the funeral. They came to the house uninvited, letting themselves in with Benjamin's key. I found them in Robert's study going through his desk drawers. "What are you doing?" I asked, and Benjamin didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Just looking for important papers," he said. "Dad would want me to handle the business affairs." The funeral was on Sunday, a small service at the church we had attended sporadically over the years. Only about 30 people came, mostly Robert's business associates and a few longtime friends. Benjamin sat in the front row with Jennifer, but I noticed he kept checking his phone throughout the service. When the pastor spoke about Robert's kindness and generosity, I saw Jennifer roll her eyes. When friends came up to share memories, Benjamin looked impatient, glancing at his watch every few minutes. After the service, people came back to the house for a reception. I had ordered catering, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, even though nothing about this felt normal. Benjamin cornered me in the kitchen while I was refilling coffee cups. "We need to talk about the estate," he said. "Not today," I replied. "Today we're honoring your father." He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. "The estate needs to be settled, Mother. There are time constraints." Jennifer appeared beside him, perfectly coiffed, even at a funeral wearing a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Madison," she said in that condescending tone she always used with me, "we know this is difficult, but Benjamin has rights as Robert's son. There are assets that need to be transferred, accounts that need to be accessed. We've been patient, but business doesn't stop for grief." I pulled my arm away from Benjamin and looked at both of them. "Your father has been dead for 3 days. 3 days. Can you at least pretend to care that he's gone?" Benjamin's face hardened. "I care about protecting what Dad built," he said. "I care about making sure his company continues to thrive." That's what he would want. Strange, I thought, how he suddenly cared about what his father wanted when there was money involved. 2 days later, on Tuesday morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. I had barely slept, spending most nights in Robert's study, reading through his papers, trying to understand what he had been trying to tell me. When I opened the door, Benjamin and Jennifer stood there with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. "This is Marcus Wellington," Jennifer said, pushing past me into the house. "He's our attorney. We need to discuss the disposition of Robert's assets." The way she said "our attorney" made it clear that this man was here to represent their interests, not mine. I followed them into the living room, where they had already made themselves comfortable, Wellington spreading documents across my coffee table. Mrs. Harrison Wellington began in a voice that was probably meant to be soothing, but came across as patronizing. "I understand this is a difficult time, but there are urgent matters that require immediate attention. Your son has power of attorney over Robert's estate granted 3 years ago." He produced a document, and my heart sank when I recognized Robert's signature at the bottom. I remembered that day 3 years ago. Robert had been rushing to catch a flight to Singapore for a major deal. Benjamin had come by with papers that he said were for insurance purposes, standard documents that needed both parents' signatures. Robert had signed quickly, trusting his son, and I had signed too without reading carefully. Now Wellington was telling me that those papers gave Benjamin control over everything. Furthermore, Wellington continued, "There are irregularities in the estate that need to be addressed. Large sums of money were moved just before Robert's death. This could be seen as an attempt to defraud the rightful heir. We need immediate access to all accounts to conduct a proper audit." Jennifer leaned forward with a predatory smile. "We wouldn't want this to get ugly, Madison. Courts tend to be sympathetic to children who have been cut out of their inheritance." I looked at my son, searching for any sign of the boy I had raised, the child who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms, who cried when our dog died, who told me he loved me every night before bed. That boy was gone, replaced by this cold stranger who saw his father's death as a business opportunity. "Benjamin," I said quietly, "your father just died. How can you do this?" He stood up, his face flushed with anger. "How can I do this? How can you? Dad promised me I would take over his companies. I'm his son, his heir. Everything he built was supposed to be mine. And you," he pointed at me, "you manipulated him at the end. You turned him against me. You stole what was rightfully mine." The accusation was so shocking, so far from the truth, that I couldn't speak for a moment. Jennifer stood too moving to stand beside her husband in a show of unity. "Madison, we know about the transfers. $25 million moved to accounts in your name only. That's marital asset manipulation, possibly elder abuse if Robert wasn't in his right mind. We can make this very difficult for you, or you can cooperate. Give us access to the accounts, sign over the companies, and we'll make sure you're comfortable. Fight us, and you'll lose everything." Wellington pulled out more papers, sliding them across the table toward me. "These documents will transfer control of all assets to Benjamin as is proper. You'll receive a generous monthly allowance, enough to maintain your current lifestyle. All you have to do is sign." He held out a pen, and the three of them watched me expectantly, like vultures waiting for their prey to stop struggling. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking but my voice steady. "Get out of my house, all of you. Get out now." Benjamin's face turned red. "You can't throw me out. This is my childhood home. This house is part of the estate." "Not anymore," I said. "Your father transferred everything to me before he died. Everything. And I want you out." Wellington started to speak something about legal challenges and court orders, but I cut him off. "Out, now, or I call the police." They left, but not before Benjamin turned at the door and said, "You have until Monday to reconsider. After that, we file suit. We'll drag you through court, Mother. We'll destroy your reputation. Everyone will know how you manipulated a dying man to steal his fortune from his only child." After they left, I deadbolted the door and ran to Robert's study. I needed to find that folder he had mentioned, the one marked with Thursday's date. I needed to understand what Robert had known. The folder was exactly where Robert had said it would be, in the locked drawer of his desk, marked with Thursday's date in his careful handwriting. Inside, I found a world of betrayal I never could have imagined. The first document was a letter from Robert to me dated the day before he died. "My dearest Madison," it began. "If you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and I'm no longer with you. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but I needed to protect you. What I'm about to tell you will hurt, but you need to know the truth. Our son is not who we thought he was. Neither is Jennifer. They have been planning something terrible, and I fear I may be their first victim." My hands shook as I continued reading. Robert explained that he had hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago after Benjamin's behavior became increasingly erratic. The investigator had uncovered a web of lies, debts, and criminal connections. Benjamin had been gambling heavily, owing over $3 million to dangerous people. He had been stealing from Robert's companies, using his access as Robert's son to siphon funds. The investigator had provided proof: bank records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations. The next document was even more shocking. It was an email thread between Benjamin and Jennifer dating back 4 months. They discussed their plan in detail. Jennifer had researched untraceable poison substances that would cause heart failure and be virtually undetectable in an autopsy. Benjamin talked about his access to Robert's food and drinks when he visited. They calculated how long it would take, what dosage would be needed, how to make it look natural. One email from Jennifer made my blood run cold. "Once your father is gone, your mother will be easy to handle. She's weak trusting. We'll get her to sign everything over, or we'll make her disappear too. Another accident, another tragedy. You'll be the grieving son who lost both parents. No one will suspect anything." Benjamin had responded with just 2 words. "Sounds perfect." I had to stop reading to run to the bathroom, physically sick at what I was seeing. My own son had murdered his father and was planning to murder me. The boy I had carried for 9 months, had nursed through fevers, had taught to ride a bike, had loved unconditionally, was a monster. And I had been blind to it all. The folder contained more evidence. Bank statements showing Benjamin's massive debts. Photos of him meeting with known criminals. Documentation of the money he had stolen from Robert's companies, almost $3 million over 2 years. There were records of insurance policies Benjamin had taken out on both Robert and me, $1 million policies that would pay out in case of accidental death or death by natural causes. There was also a recording device, a small digital recorder with a note from Robert. "Listen to this," the note said. "I recorded this last Tuesday when Benjamin came to the house." I pressed play with trembling fingers. Benjamin's voice filled the room, talking to someone on the phone. "It's almost done. Dad will be gone within the week. Mom will be next if she doesn't cooperate. We'll have everything by Christmas." The most damning evidence was a report from a toxicologist Robert had consulted confidentially. He had suspected he was being poisoned and had blood and hair samples tested. The results showed traces of a synthetic compound that mimicked the effects of a heart attack when built up in the system over time. Robert had known he was dying, had known our son was killing him, and he had used his last days to protect me. At the bottom of the folder was a business card for Detective James Morrison from the Financial Crimes Division of the Boston Police Department. Robert had written on the back, "Call him immediately. He knows everything." There was also contact information for an FBI agent named Sarah Chen who was investigating Benjamin's gambling associates. Robert had been building a case, gathering evidence, preparing to turn his own son into authorities. The final item in the folder was another letter from Robert, shorter this time. "Madison, I know this is devastating. I know you'll want to deny it to find another explanation. Don't. Benjamin is dangerous and Jennifer is worse. They killed me and they will kill you if given the chance. Use the evidence. Call the authorities. Don't let my death be for nothing. Protect yourself. I love you more than words can say. Forever yours, Robert." I sat in that study for hours, reading and rereading everything, listening to the recordings, looking at the evidence. Part of me wanted to deny it to find some other explanation. This couldn't be my Benjamin. But the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Robert had been murdered by our son, poisoned slowly over weeks or months, and I was supposed to be next. I thought about confronting Benjamin, showing him what I had found, demanding an explanation. But Robert's warning echoed in my mind. They will kill you if given the chance. I thought about running, disappearing with the money, starting a new life somewhere they couldn't find me. But that would mean letting them get away with murder, letting Robert's death go unavenged. By Sunday night, I had made my decision. I would fight. I would use Robert's evidence to destroy them the way they had destroyed my family. I called Detective Morrison and left a message, then called the FBI agent. Both called back within an hour, having been expecting my call. We arranged to meet early Monday morning before Benjamin's deadline. I would wear a wire, get them to confess, and then watch as they were arrested for murder. I spent that night in Robert's study, surrounded by his things, talking to him as if he could hear me. I told him about my plan, about how I would get justice for him. I promised him that Benjamin and Jennifer would pay for what they had done. I apologized for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting him the way he had protected me. And I thanked him for his final gift, for loving me enough to save my life, even as he was losing his own. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, fitting weather for what was about to happen. I met Detective Morrison and Agent Chen at a coffee shop downtown at 6 a.m. They had already reviewed the evidence Robert had provided them, had already opened investigations into Benjamin and Jennifer. What Robert had gathered, combined with their own findings, was enough for arrests, but a confession would seal the case completely. They fitted me with a tiny recording device so small it was virtually undetectable. Detective Morrison coached me on what to say, how to get them talking. Agent Chen explained that they would have teams positioned around my house, ready to move in once they had enough. I was terrified but determined. Robert had died to protect me, and I would not waste his sacrifice. I returned home to find Benjamin, Jennifer, and Wellington already there, having let themselves in again. They were in the living room, documents spread across every surface. Benjamin looked up when I entered, his expression triumphant. "I knew you'd come to your senses," he said. "No mother wants to see her son in court. You made the right decision." I sat down across from them, trying to appear defeated, broken. "You win," I said quietly. "I'll sign whatever you want. Just leave me enough to live on." Jennifer and Wellington exchanged satisfied looks, while Benjamin leaned back in his chair, finally the victor he had always wanted to be. "I knew you'd see reason," he said. "Dad always said you were too emotional, too weak to handle the business side of things." Wellington pushed the papers toward me again, but I hesitated. "Before I sign, I need to understand something. Why now?" "Why did you wait until your father was gone to do this?" Benjamin laughed, an ugly sound that bore no resemblance to the laugh of the child I once knew. "You really don't know, do you? Dad was going to cut me off completely. He found out about some investments that went bad, some money I borrowed from the company. He was going to disown me, write me out of everything. And that justified this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "That justified what you did to him?" Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. Robert was old, stuck in his ways. The companies needed fresh leadership, someone with vision. Benjamin has that vision. Robert would never have stepped aside willingly. Sometimes nature needs a little help. "So you helped nature along," I said, looking directly at Jennifer. "You gave it a push." She smiled, that same cold smile I had seen so many times. Let's just say that Robert's diet became much more interesting in his last months. Special supplements in his coffee, vitamins that weren't quite what they seemed. All natural ingredients, of course. Nothing that would show up in a standard autopsy. Genius, really. Benjamin actually looked proud as Jennifer spoke. "It was her idea," he said, gesturing to his wife. "She researched everything, found the perfect combination. Slow enough that no one would suspect, fast enough that we wouldn't have to wait years." Dad never knew what hit him. The chest pains started just like she said they would. The shortness of breath, the fatigue. Classic heart failure symptoms. Even the doctors didn't suspect anything. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but I forced myself to remain calm. And if I hadn't signed the papers, what was the plan for me? Wellington started to speak, probably to stop them from saying anything more, but Benjamin was on a roll, drunk with his own perceived cleverness. Oh, Mother, you would have had an accident. Maybe a fall down the stairs. Maybe a car crash. Jennifer had several scenarios planned. We have insurance policies on you too, you know. Took them out years ago. You're worth more dead than alive. Jennifer nodded, adding her own details. The grieving widow overcome with sorrow, taking too many sleeping pills. Or perhaps developing the same heart condition that killed her husband. Genetics are so unpredictable. We would have been the devastated family inheriting everything but wishing we had our parents back. The media would have eaten it up. Tech mogul and wife die tragically within months of each other. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. When did you become this person? When did you decide that money was worth more than your father's life? Worth more than my life? Benjamin's expression hardened. When I realized that you and Dad were never going to see me as anything more than a failure. Every business I started, every investment I made, Dad found fault with it. Nothing was ever good enough. Well, now I have everything, and I didn't need his approval to get it. Wellington finally interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with how much they were revealing. Perhaps we should focus on the paperwork. Mrs. Harrison has agreed to sign, so let's complete the transfer and be done with this. But I had one more question. The power of attorney, I said. Those papers 3 years ago. You were planning this even then. Benjamin actually laughed. Of course we were. Jennifer saw the potential the moment she met me. She knew what we could have if we were patient, if we planned carefully. I stood up slowly, looking at each of them in turn. I just wanted to understand, I said. I needed to hear it from you. And now I have. Benjamin looked confused for a moment. Then his face went pale as the door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Benjamin jumped to his feet. Jennifer screamed, and Wellington raised his hands immediately, his face white with shock. Benjamin looked at me with pure hatred as they put him in handcuffs. You set me up, he snarled. You betrayed your own son. No, I said quietly. You betrayed your father, and you tried to betray me. You murdered Robert, and you planned to murder me. You're not my son anymore. You're just the man who killed the love of my life. As they led him away, he shouted that I would regret this, that I had destroyed our family. But he was wrong. He had destroyed our family the moment he decided his father's life was worth less than money. Jennifer tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. As they arrested her, she maintained her composure, that ice-cold calm never cracking. She looked at me with those calculating eyes and said, You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family has connections. This isn't over. But Agent Chen informed her that her family's connections wouldn't help where she was going. The evidence was overwhelming, and she had just confessed to murder on tape. Wellington tried to claim he knew nothing about the murder, that he was just their attorney, but the investigators had found evidence of his involvement too. He had helped Jennifer research the poisons, had provided contacts for obtaining them, had helped structure the insurance policies to avoid suspicion. He was as guilty as they were, and his legal career was over before the handcuffs clicked shut. After they were gone, I stood in my empty house surrounded by the scattered papers of their attempted theft. Detective Morrison stayed behind to take my statement to collect the documents as evidence. He told me I had been brave, that Robert would have been proud. But I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and left just a shell. The investigation that followed revealed even more than Robert had discovered. Benjamin's debts were closer to $5 million. He had been embezzling from multiple companies, not just Robert's. Jennifer had done this before her first husband had died under suspicious circumstances, though it had never been proven. Wellington had been disbarred previously in another state for ethics violations. They were all predators, and Robert and I had been their prey. The media attention was overwhelming. Tech mogul's son arrested for father's murder. Wife and attorney complicit in elaborate murder plot. Widow wears wire to catch husband's killers. Reporters camped outside my house, called, constantly tried to get exclusive interviews. I gave one statement through my attorney saying only that justice had been served and asking for privacy to grieve. Then I disappeared from public view. The trial took place 6 months later. By then I had sold the house in Wellesley, unable to live surrounded by memories of betrayal. I moved to a small coastal town in Maine, a place Robert and I had visited once and talked about retiring to someday. I bought a modest cottage overlooking the ocean, far from the world of tech money and ambitious children who killed their parents for inheritance. I testified at the trial, sitting in that witness box and telling the world how my son had murdered his father. Benjamin sat at the defendant's table, trying to look remorseful for the jury, but I saw the hatred in his eyes whenever he looked at me. Jennifer maintained her Ice Queen persona throughout, never showing emotion, even when the toxicologist testified about the poison found in Robert's system during the second autopsy. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Benjamin received 25 to life for first-degree murder. Jennifer got 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Wellington was disbarred permanently and sentenced to 10 years for his role in the conspiracy. When the verdicts were read, I felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a deep sadness for the waste of it all. 3 lives destroyed by greed, and Robert gone forever. After the trial, I had decisions to make about the money. $25 million felt like blood money, now tainted by what had been done to obtain it. I kept $5 million, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. The other $20 million I used to establish the Robert Harrison Foundation for Ethical Entrepreneurship. It provides funding for young entrepreneurs who demonstrate not just business acumen, but also strong moral character. I work with the foundation now, reviewing applications, mentoring young people who remind me of what Robert and I once were: hungry and eager, but also principled and kind. I tell them Robert's story, not the ending, but the beginning and middle. How he built companies that made a difference, how he treated employees like family, how he believed business could be a force for good in the world. The healing has been slow and painful. I see a therapist twice a week, working through the trauma of betrayal, the grief of losing Robert, the complicated mourning for the son I thought I had. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes I wake up expecting to find Robert beside me, only to remember he's gone. Sometimes I see a young man who looks like Benjamin used to look, and my heart breaks all over again. I've made new friends in my small Maine town. People who don't know my story, who just know me as Madison, the widow who moved here from Boston. I volunteer at the local library, teaching computer skills to seniors. I joined a book club where we read mysteries, though none as twisted as my own life became. Slowly, carefully, I'm building a new life from the ashes of the old one. I think about Robert every day. Not about how he died, but about how he lived. How he loved me so completely that his last act was to protect me. How he must have felt when he realized our son was poisoning him, the heartbreak of that betrayal. How he used his remaining time not for revenge, but for justice, gathering evidence, making sure I would be safe. That was Robert's true character, thinking of others even as his own life slipped away. Sometimes I get letters from Benjamin in prison. I don't read them anymore. The first few were full of rage and blame, accusing me of destroying his life. The later ones claimed remorse, begged for forgiveness, played on my maternal feelings. But I know better now. Benjamin is a sociopath, incapable of real remorse. His tears at the trial were for himself, not for his father. His letters are just another manipulation, another attempt to control me. I mark them return to sender and try to forget they ever arrived. The lesson I've learned from all of this is hard but essential. Love doesn't mean blindness. Being family doesn't excuse evil. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who will most readily spill it. Robert tried to protect Benjamin for too long, making excuses, hoping he would change. It cost Robert his life. But in his final days, Robert saw clearly and acted decisively. He saved me even though it meant condemning his own son. People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven Benjamin. The truth is, I haven't. Maybe I never will. Forgiveness feels like a luxury I can't afford. What I've done instead is let go. I've released the anger that was poisoning me the way Benjamin poisoned Robert. I've stopped trying to understand how my baby boy became a killer. Some things don't have explanations that make sense to normal people. Some hearts are just born cold. The $25 million that seemed like such a fortune now feels like a number on paper. Money didn't save Robert. It didn't save our family. In fact, it destroyed everything we built together. But through the foundation, maybe that money can do some good. Maybe it can help young entrepreneurs build something better. Something that isn't based on greed and ambition, but on innovation and integrity. I'm 60 now, and I know I have more years behind me than ahead. I spend my days quietly watching the ocean, reading, working with the foundation. I've learned to cook for one to sleep alone without feeling lonely. To find joy in small moments. A perfect cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, a good book, the smile of a young entrepreneur who just received funding to chase their dream the right way. Some betrayals cut deeper than death itself, but surviving them makes you realize that true love isn't about blood or money. It's about those who protect you even when they're gone. Robert loved me enough to save me from our own son. Now I live each day honoring that love by helping others avoid the trap that nearly destroyed me. If someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time, even if it breaks your heart. The irony isn't lost on me. Benjamin wanted the money so badly he was willing to kill for it. Now that money is being used to help strangers build ethical businesses, to create the kind of companies Robert would have been proud of. Benjamin sits in a prison cell, while Robert's legacy lives on through the foundation. Jennifer's cold calculation got her 20 years behind bars. Wellington's greed cost him everything. And I'm still here, still standing, still breathing. Robert made sure of that. Sometimes late at night when the ocean is calm and the moon is bright, I walk down to the beach and talk to Robert. I tell him about the foundation, about the young people we're helping. I tell him I'm okay, that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear his voice telling me he loves me, that he's proud of me, that everything happened exactly as it needed to happen to keep me safe. Those are the moments when the grief lifts just a little, when I remember that love is stronger than death, stronger than betrayal, stronger than all the darkness in the world. So if you're watching this, and you have someone in your life who truly loves you, who would protect you even at great cost to themselves, cherish them. And if you have doubts about someone's character, if your instincts are warning you that something isn't right, listen. Robert's instincts saved my life. My instincts finally awakened, brought justice for his death. Trust yourself. Protect yourself. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of those who would harm you, even if they're family, even if they're your own child. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own safety? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was capable of unthinkable betrayal? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you or helped you in any way, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Share it with anyone who might need to hear that surviving betrayal is possible, that there is life after the ultimate deception. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the people who truly love you want you to be safe, not under their control. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never apologize for protecting yourself.